All right. Welcome to another narration of mine. Only the brave souls and the fearless ones stay until the end. My dad didn't die in some dramatic way. No crash, no fire, no crime scene photos that look good on the news. He died in a hospital bed with a curtain half pulled and a machine that kept making a soft, tired sound, like it was bored of doing its job. I was there when it happened. My mom wasn't. She had gone home to shower. She kept saying she smelled like antiseptic and grief and wanted to wash it off before it soaked into her skin. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be alone with him either. But someone had to stay. The room was too bright. Hospitals always are. It felt like the lights were pointed directly at my thoughts. My dad's mouth hung open slightly. His lips were dry and cracked. He had this look like he was halfway through saying something and just stopped. His chest moved wrong, not steady, like he was forgetting how. When the heart monitor finally went flat, it wasn't loud. It didn't scream like in movies. It just complained once, quietly, and then went still. I stood there for a long time before I realized I was holding my breath. A nurse came in, then another. They spoke in soft voices, like they were afraid they might wake him up by accident. One of them touched his arm and nodded to the other. That was it. That was my father's whole life, reduced to a nod. About an hour later, after paperwork and questions that felt insulting, a police officer came in. That alone wasn't strange. Dad's death was sudden. No long illness. No clear explanation. They said it was standard procedure. What stuck with me was the smell. Everyone else in that room smelled the same. Bleach, plastic, old flowers that had been sitting in water too long, fear that people try to hide under deodorant. The officer didn't smell like any of that. He smelled like rain hitting metal, like a wet coin rubbed between your fingers, like blood after it's been exposed to air too long. It didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, like my brain didn't want to accept it. He introduced himself calmly. His voice wasn't cold or warm, just finished, like he already knew how the conversation would go. He stood too close when he spoke, not in a threatening way, just close enough that I could see tiny cracks in the leather of his belt, close enough that the lights overhead flickered once when he leaned in, like they were adjusting to him. I remember thinking the flicker was normal. Old building, old wiring. Then the heart monitor beside my dad's bed stuttered. Just once. A nurse noticed it too. She frowned at the screen and tapped it like that would fix whatever just happened. The officer stepped back half a step, and the machine went still again. He asked me when I'd last spoken to my dad. I told him the truth, the night before. Dad had been tired, short of breath. He joked about hospital food and asked me to bring him real coffee next time. I didn't. The officer nodded and wrote something down. His pen scratched the paper harder than it needed to. He asked if my dad had enemies. I almost laughed. My dad fixed air conditioners. His biggest rival was heat. He asked if my dad had said anything strange recently. Any fears? Any regrets? That question sat wrong with me. Not illegal, not improper, just wrong. I told him no. He looked at me for a long moment after that. His eyes didn't move the way people's usually do. There was no searching, no blinking, just a steady focus that made my face feel exposed, like I'd forgotten to put clothes on before leaving the house. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't twisted. That almost made it worse. He thanked me for my time and said he'd be in touch. When he turned to leave, I noticed something else. His shoes were spotless, not clean, polished. The kind of shine you only see when someone puts time into it, like it mattered. After the funeral, things started to feel off in quieter ways. The house smelled wrong, not rotten, not mold, just off. Like rain trapped in walls. My mom said it was stress. Grief does strange things to your senses. I believed her because I needed to. That night, when I took the trash out, I noticed marks in the dirt by the side of the house. They weren't footprints exactly. They were too narrow, too clean, pressed deep into the ground, like whoever made them had weight that didn't match their size. The shape bothered me, not because it was unfamiliar, because it was familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Like boots. But not quite. They were polished too. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the ground, trying to convince myself it was landscaping equipment, or a delivery guy, or anything normal. I didn't tell my mom. I washed my hands for a long time afterward, even though they weren't dirty. That night, I dreamed my dad was standing in the rain, trying to say something, and every time he opened his mouth, water poured out instead. When I woke up, the smell of rain and rust was still in my nose, and I knew the officer would be back. The officer didn't call ahead. I came home from work 2 days after the funeral and found his car parked across the street from my house, not in front of it, not blocking the driveway, just far enough away that it felt intentional without being obvious. It was an older model, black. No markings on the side that I could see from where I stood. The engine wasn't running, but the hood looked warm, like it had been driven recently. I stayed in my car longer than I needed to, sat there with the keys still in my hand, staring at my own front door, trying to figure out if I was overthinking it. My mom's car was in the driveway. That should have helped. It didn't. When I went inside, she was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug that was already clean. The TV was on in the living room, volume low, showing some afternoon show neither of us was watching. She asked me how work was. I told her it was fine. Then she said, very casually, "There's a police officer here asking about your father." She said it like she was talking about a plumber. I didn't ask which one. I already knew. He was sitting at the dining table, hands folded, posture perfect. He stood when he saw me, like he'd been trained to do it, like manners mattered to him in a very specific way. Up close, the smell was stronger. Not bad, not good, just wrong. He apologized for stopping by unannounced, said he was following up. My mom offered him coffee. He declined without hesitation. "I don't drink," he said. He looked at me when he said it, not her. We sat down. My mom stayed in the room, hovering near the counter, pretending to scroll on her phone while clearly listening to every word. He asked about my dad's medical history, things we'd already gone over at the hospital, heart issues, breathing problems, stress. Then he asked things that weren't on any form. Did my dad ever wake up confused? Did he ever talk in his sleep? Did he ever say he felt like time was moving wrong? I answered no to all of it, even when the last question made my mouth feel dry. The officer nodded, like he expected that. He asked where my dad worked, how long he'd been there, if he ever complained about specific clients. My mom jumped in then, saying Dad was easygoing, that he didn't hold grudges. The officer wrote something down and said, "Most people don't." There was a pause after that. Not awkward, just heavy. Then he asked me how to walk him through the night my dad went to the hospital. I told the story again. The coughing, the trouble breathing, the way Dad tried to wave it off like it was nothing. How I drove him in because calling an ambulance felt dramatic at the time. The officer asked me to describe the drive. I told him about traffic, red lights, the radio playing something I don't remember. He stopped me halfway through. "Did anything unusual happen?" I asked him what he meant. "Anything out of place," he said. "Anything that didn't belong." I thought about the way my dad had gripped the door handle too tight, how his knuckles had gone white, how he kept staring at the side mirror like he expected someone to be there. I said no. The officer watched my face for a long moment, then nodded again. He thanked us for our time and stood to leave. As he walked past me, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine, I felt cold. Not goosebumps, not a shiver, just a deep, internal cold, like my body had briefly forgotten how warm it was supposed to be. He stopped at the door and turned back. "One more thing," he said. "If you remember anything later, anything at all, I'd like you to tell me first." I asked him why. He smiled slightly. "Some memories are sensitive." After he left, my mom locked the door behind him. I don't think she realized she did it. She asked me if something felt wrong about him. I said I didn't know. That night, I couldn't sit still. The house felt smaller, like the walls had shifted inward by a few inches. I went to my dad's room. My mom hadn't touched it yet. His jacket was still hanging on the back of the chair. His boots by the door. Worn. Scuffed. Normal. I sat on the bed and tried to remember the sound of his voice without picturing him in the hospital. That's when I noticed the indent on the mattress. Not where he slept. At the foot of the bed. Like someone had been standing there. I told myself it was nothing. Old mattress. Old house. But when I leaned down, close to the fabric, I caught it again. Rain. Metal. Rust. I slept on the couch with the TV on after that. The next morning, my mom told me she dreamed about my dad standing at the edge of a road, waving like he wanted help but couldn't move. She said she woke up tired. I didn't tell her about the mattress. I didn't tell her that when I checked the driveway before leaving for work, there were fresh marks in the dust. Too narrow. Too clean. Facing the house. And I didn't tell her that. For the first time since the funeral, I was starting to think my dad didn't just die. He was taken. The next time I saw him wasn't at my house. It was at my job. I work at a small auto parts store on the edge of town. Nothing special. Fluorescent lights, concrete floors, the kind of place where people come in angry because the thing they bought last week didn't fix the real problem. It was slow that afternoon. Just me and another guy behind the counter, killing time and pretending to straighten the shelves that didn't need it. The bell above the door rang. I didn't look up right away. I knew it was him before I smelled anything. Rain. Metal. Rust. He stood by the entrance for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, like he was taking inventory, not browsing, measuring. My coworker asked if he needed help. The officer smiled politely and said, "I'm here to see him." He didn't point. He didn't have to. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt before. Not scared, not panicked, just stripped down to something basic. Like he could see where I kept the parts of myself I didn't show anyone. We stepped outside because I didn't want him talking about my dad where customers could hear. He said it wouldn't take long. He said that a lot. He asked how I was holding up. I told him the truth, that I was tired, that everything felt slightly wrong all the time, that I kept thinking I heard my dad moving around in the house. He nodded, like I'd confirmed something. Then he said, "Your father didn't like hospitals?" I asked him how he knew that. He looked genuinely surprised for half a second, like he'd forgotten he wasn't supposed to say that. "It came up," he said calmly. I told him my dad hadn't been to a hospital in years before that night. The officer corrected me. "Not like that," he said. He didn't like what happens there. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me if I'd found anything unusual in the house, anything misplaced, anything that didn't belong to my father. I thought about the mattress, the smell, the marks outside. I told him no. He studied my face again. That same still focus. Then he said something that made my hands go numb. Your father stayed awake the entire drive to the hospital. I told him that wasn't true. Dad was barely conscious by the time we parked. The officer shook his head gently. He never slept, he said. Not that night. I asked him if he'd spoken to the nurse or read a report. He said no. He said, I was there. I laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp. Too loud. You weren't, I said. I would remember. He tilted his head slightly. Not curious. Considering. Most people don't, he said. That was when I noticed his hands. They were clean, not just washed, untouched. No scars, no hangnails, no signs of age. They looked unused, like props. He asked me if my dad ever talked about death. I said, everyone does, sometimes. He asked if my dad ever said he was afraid of it. I told him no. That wasn't entirely true. My dad used to joke about dying all the time, but there was this one night, maybe a year ago, where he'd been quiet. We were sitting in the garage, drinking cheap beer, listening to the rain hit the roof. He said, I don't mind dying. Then he paused. I just don't want to be rushed. I hadn't thought about that until the officer smiled. Not wide, just enough. He told me he'd be in touch again and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away. The tires didn't kick up dust, didn't leave tracks. That night, I went through my dad's things, not out of grief, out of anger. I checked drawers, boxes, old paperwork, receipts, notes, anything that might explain why a police officer was talking like he'd been part of my father's final moments. I found something tucked into an envelope behind old tax forms. A hospital wristband, not from the night he died, from months earlier. Different date, different hospital. I asked my mom about it. She went quiet in a way that scared me more than if she'd started crying. She said my dad had gone in once because he felt wrong, that he made her promise not to tell me, that the doctors couldn't find anything and sent him home after a few hours. I asked her why she kept the wristband. She said my dad told her to. That night, I dreamed I was sitting in the passenger seat of my own car, watching myself drive. My dad was in the back seat, awake, staring straight ahead. And in the mirror, someone else sat beside him. I woke up before I could see his face. The next morning, there was a voicemail on my phone. No missed call, no timestamp, just a message. The officer's voice. He said, "We need to talk about what your father agreed to." I didn't call him back. Not because I was brave, not because I had a plan. I just didn't know what I would say if I heard his voice again. There are moments where silence feels like the only thing you still control. That didn't last. He showed up again that evening. Not at my house, not at work. At the grocery store. I was standing in the frozen aisle, staring at bags of food I didn't want, trying to remember what normal people eat when their father dies. My cart had been empty for a while. I kept forgetting why I was there. I smelled him before I saw him. He stood at the end of the aisle, reading the back of a frozen pizza box like he was learning something new. He set it back in the freezer when he noticed me. He didn't act surprised. "I was hoping I'd run into you," he said. I asked him how he knew I'd be there. He said, "You always shop on Wednesdays." That wasn't true. Not always. We walked without really deciding to, side by side. Like this was a normal conversation between two people who knew each other. He told me he didn't like phone calls, said things could be misunderstood that way. I asked him what my dad had agreed to. He stopped walking. Right there, between the cereal and the bread. People moved around us. A kid cried somewhere. A cart squeaked. Life kept happening. "He agreed to time," the officer said. I asked him what that meant. "He asked for more," he said. "Not much, just enough to finish what he thought mattered." I told him my dad didn't make deals like that. The officer nodded. "Most people don't think they do." He told me my dad didn't die when the monitor stopped. He said the body did, but that wasn't the same thing. He explained it like a policy issue, like an insurance claim. Sometimes, he said, there's a delay, a gap, a window where things can be adjusted. I asked him why my dad. He said my dad was practical, calm, willing to listen. He said my dad didn't panic when he realized who he was talking to. I asked him who that was. He didn't answer. We paid separately. I don't remember what I bought. I don't think it mattered. Outside, he leaned against his car like he had all the time in the world. He told me my dad was supposed to come back once, just once, to settle things, to say what needed to be said. But my dad hesitated. "Hesitation changes outcomes," the officer said. I asked him what that meant for my dad. He told me the extension expired. I asked him what that meant for me. He studied my face for a long time, longer than before. "You're involved now," he said. "Not by choice, by proximity." I asked him if my dad was suffering. He said no. I didn't believe him. He told me there were procedures for situations like this. Reviews, follow-ups, adjustments. I asked him why he kept coming to me. He said, "Because your father trusted you." That hit harder than anything else he'd said. He opened his trunk and took out a folder. No logos, no labels, just thick paper. Inside were photos, not crime scene photos. Moments. My dad sitting in the car, gripping the wheel, eyes wide but focused. My dad standing in our kitchen at night, staring at the sink like he was listening to something. My dad in his hospital bed, eyes open, looking directly at the camera. I asked who took them. The officer said, "I did." I asked why. He said, "Documentation." I asked him what he wanted from me. He closed the trunk. "I need to know if your father told you anything," he said. "Anything he wasn't supposed to." I told him no. That was a lie. My dad used to say one strange thing near the end. Whenever he felt short of breath, whenever the room felt too quiet, he'd say, "I think I signed something I didn't read all the way." I never asked what he meant. The officer looked at me like he already knew. He told me I'd hear from him again soon. As he drove away, I noticed something I hadn't before. His car didn't have plates. That night, my mom asked me why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't answer. I went to my room and sat on the floor until it was dark. I kept thinking about contracts, about fine print, about what people agree to when they're tired and scared and just want a little more time. And for the first time, I wondered if my dad hadn't been taken at all, if he'd been collected. I didn't see him again until my mom collapsed. Not died. Not yet. She fainted in the living room while trying to carry a laundry basket that was half empty. One second she was standing. The next she was on the floor, eyes open, but not seeing anything. I called an ambulance. Real ones this time. At the hospital, everything felt too familiar. Same colors, same smells I didn't want to remember. Same questions asked by people who already seemed bored with the answers. They said it was exhaustion, stress. Grief does strange things to the body. They admitted her overnight for observation. I sat alone in the waiting area, staring at a wall-mounted TV with the sound off, when I felt it again. That smell. Not strong, controlled. Like he knew how much was enough. He didn't sit next to me this time. He stood a few feet away, hands behind his back, looking at the floor like a man waiting for an elevator. "You weren't supposed to be here for this," he said. I asked him what he was doing in a hospital if he wasn't a real cop. He finally looked at me. "I never said I wasn't real." I told him to stop pretending, that I knew this wasn't an investigation, that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with the law. He nodded. "You're right," he said. "I don't enforce laws. I enforce outcomes." That was the first time he sounded tired. I asked him if my mom was going to die. He said, "Not today." I asked him how he knew. He looked past me, toward the hall, where patients were being moved room to room, some crying, some silent, some already gone in ways their bodies hadn't caught up to yet. "This is my route," he said. "I know the schedule." I asked him what he was. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he told me about my father's last conversation with him. Not the hospital, not the car, the garage. My dad had been alone, sitting on a stool, trying to catch his breath, angry at his own body for betraying him. He said he didn't want to go yet, not because he was afraid, but because he felt unfinished. The officer listened. He always listens, apparently. He asked for more time, the officer said. I told him what it would cost. I asked him what the cost was. He said, presents. I didn't understand. Most people pass cleanly, he said. Some linger, some bargain. Some ask to stay close, to check in, to make sure their people are okay. I asked him if my dad was haunting us. The officer shook his head. No, he said. Your father was granted a temporary assignment. That word made my stomach turn. Assignment. He told me my dad was allowed to stay near us for a short period, to watch, to reassure himself. But he wasn't allowed to interfere. My dad broke that rule. He tried to wake my mom one night when she stopped breathing for a few seconds in her sleep. He tried to stand at the foot of my bed when I was spiraling and hadn't slept in days. He made himself known, the officer said. That's not permitted. I asked him what happened then. The officer adjusted his belt. The badge caught the light for a moment. I had to correct it. I asked him what he really was. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said it, simple and flat, like stating a job title. I'm the one who takes people where they're supposed to go. No scythe, no shadows, no dramatics, just a function. I asked him why he wore a uniform. He said people accept authority more easily when it looks familiar. I asked him if my dad was gone now. He nodded once. Fully processed, he said. I asked him if I was in danger. He looked at me differently then, almost kind. No, he said. You were never on my list. I asked him why he kept coming back. He said, because your father asked me to make sure you understood. Understood what? That death isn't cruel, he said. Just thorough. My mom survived. She came home 2 days later, shaken but alive. The officer never came back after that. But sometimes, when I drive at night, I see a black car parked just far enough away to be polite. Sometimes, when rain hits metal just right, I think of my dad sitting calmly somewhere, knowing he got what he asked for. And sometimes, when someone I know dies suddenly, peacefully, with no clear reason, I wonder which officer handled the case, and whether they asked for more time.